All right, welcome to Kant. So this week, or these few lectures, excuse me, we will be looking at Kant and stepping into modern philosophy. And the next week, or the next set of lectures, will be John Stuart Mill. So we'll get the main two modern ethicists over the next few lectures. So today I want to do sort of an introduction to Mill and the sort of the grounding of his ethics, right? So we won't jump into his ethical formula quite yet, but see where it is that he's coming from. So let's go ahead and show the screen. Oops. All right. So modern ethics, what does it look like? There are two different approaches generally in modern ethics. One of them is a deontological approach, which is a rule-based approach. So it tries to establish certain moral rules that we follow, like, don't lie, don't kill, so on. Consequentialist approaches, on the other hand, don't look for rules, but they look to the ends of the action, right? What can increase, right, the sort of what can increase benefit and decrease detriment, right? What can create a good end compared to a bad end? And it's really sort of a cost-benefit analysis. Consequentialists recognize that sometimes actions can cause harm, but if the benefit outweighs that harm, the action is going to be okay. So another way of putting this is ends justify the means for consequentialists. While for deontologists, the ends never justify the means. So we'll take a look at how Kant comes to his deontological point of view. Mill will be a consequentialist, which we'll get to. Oh, I do want to mention this here. This third bullet point: rules can be internal constraints or external. So internal constraints can come from our reasoning or some sort of moral conscience, while our external constraints can come from the outside, such as the law, right? And both of these can be forms of deontology. All right, so here's Kant. Sorry, I just want to make sure I get his dates correct. So his dates are 1724 to 1804. He was born in Prussia, which is now largely Russia. The area that he was born in has now become part of Russia, actually. But anyway, it's part of the German-speaking world. And a few things about Kant. First of all, he was an Enlightenment figure. So he tried to ground his thought in reason, right? The Enlightenment was this age of reason, this move from sort of religious-based, medieval-based way of looking at the world to sort of a scientific and rational way of looking at the world. The rejection of tradition, a rejection of sort of old religious concepts, the rejection of much of the monarchistic approaches to government. And so the Enlightenment, Kant and the Enlightenment are sort of important to his project in ethics, because for him, ethics is a almost purely rational enterprise. So he divides ethics into two different types. One he calls philosophical ethics, and the other are empirical ethics. So philosophical ethics mean that they must start from a purely rationalistic standpoint. The empirical ethics are descriptive in nature, right? So they look at a society, look at our reality around us and say, okay, these are the ethical rules that people tend to follow in this society, in this culture. We can sort of consider anthropological in nature. But the rationalist starting point for Kant gives us a normative, meaning It can tell us how we should act, not just how it is we happen to act, but how we should act. Philosophical ethics also must hold for all rational beings, right? So he says that we're all rational beings, one, because he's trying to distinguish human beings from non-human animals, and second, because he believes that God is a purely rational being. Related to this is his a priori starting point. So a priori means independent of experience. So we don't have to have any experience at all to know what is right and wrong, right? We don't have to experience anything to know that stealing is wrong or that lying is wrong. On the other hand, right, there are forms of ethics like David Hume, who bases his ethics on a posteriori basis, or based on experience. For him, sympathy or empathy are understood through the experience of pain and pleasure, right? So it's that experience for Hume that grounds his ethics. It's reason alone that grounds Kant's ethics. And I asked there, why does this matter? Well, for Hume, if we're talking about our experience, it's a little more difficult to establish a universal ethic, right? To find something that is universally applicable to all beings. For Kant, he uses reason because he believes that if we establish it within reason, that it'll be universal, right? All rational beings must adhere to whatever the outcome happens to be. Of this sort of question about whether or not there can be a philosophical ethic, he says there must be such a philosophy, as evident from the common idea of duty and morals. Everyone must admit that if a law is to be morally valid, that is to be valid as a grounds of obligation, then it must carry with it absolute necessity. You must admit that the command that thou shalt not lie does not hold only for men, as if other rational beings had no need to abide by it. So reason, right? Reason gives us this universality that all rational beings must abide by the rules that are established by reason, right? Reason is this sort of underlying principle that we all have, right? This thing that we've all got that allows us to overcome our differences. Kant says that there's one thing that's good in itself, one and only one thing, and that is goodwill. He's sort of contrasting this with happiness. So Aristotle, if you recall, believed that happiness is the greatest, the one thing that is good in itself. He rejects happiness because he believes that achieving happiness can be come by just by following our sort of emotions, right? That we don't have to necessarily live according to any moral framework in order to achieve happiness. But to be morally good, right? We have to follow certain concepts. We have to follow certain rules. And when we follow those rules, our will, right, our freedom, is good. And so, you know, our freedom can either go in the direction of desire, right, or it can go in the direction of reason. And so when it goes in the direction of reason, it's a good will, as he puts it. The grounding for Kant's ethics is this notion of duty. Recall that he's a deontologist, and that means that duty is the basis of morality. In the case of what it is to be morally good, that it conform to the moral law is not enough. It must also be done for the sake of duty. Okay, so remember I said that there's certain deontologists that believe the rules come from the outside, and other deontologists that believe that the rules come from the inside. Kant is of the latter, right? He believes that rules come from the inside. Otherwise, it would be just fine to say that you conform to the moral rule, and that's all. But for Kant, you have to do the right thing for the right reason, right? Not because you're getting rewarded for doing the right thing, or you're going to be, punished for doing the wrong thing, right? That's not a good enough reason, right? It must be done from a sake of duty alone. So we're not looking for an end, a reward, or even because we enjoy it, right? Enjoying doing the right thing is not good enough. We have to do it from a sake of pure duty alone. So what is it that motivates us to do the right thing? So we have two different motivators. One is duty and the other is inclination. Inclination are all those other things, you know, our desires and wishes, you know, the external law, tradition, our feelings, our emotions, and so on. Right? Those are inclination, and that's how we're going to act if we can't pull ourselves out of it through reason. Right? That's our sort of, as Kant would sort of understand, our animalistic way of being. Now, he does say that we're inclined for honor, which means we're inclined to do the right thing because we'll be honored for doing so. He says that that's good insofar as it helps establish a good society, right? So we should encourage it, right? But it does not give us moral esteem by doing those things. Moral esteem only comes from duty, not from following our inclination. So this idea of inclination, for Aristotle, inclination is how we guide our way of being. That the reason inclination works is because it's through our habitual natures that we act morally. And once we've established a habit, then our inclination will push us to do what is sort of habitually the case for us. If we haven't established those habits, right, our inclination is going to push us to do vicious activities, right, wrong activities. Kant rejects this idea. Says that inclination has nothing to do with moral action, right? And to think so, right, is to confuse what it means to be a moral being. So proposition to morality for Kant. Actions must be done from duty to have moral worth. An action done from duty has its moral worth not in the purpose, right, the end that is to be attained, right, not in the result, but in the maxim according to which it is determined. So the rule, right, maxim there is just a fancy word for the word rule. So we don't care about the end of our actions, the result of our actions. Rather, we care about the rule we decided to give to ourselves. And so if lying will actually create better results, right, it will harm less. It doesn't matter, right, because that's looking at the results. Rather, we have to look at the rule, which is to lie or not to lie, and determine which of those is the correct course of action. And for Kant, it'll be to not lie, right? Duty is the necessity of action done out of respect for the moral law. Okay, to use the necessity of action done out of respect for the moral law. So when the moral law tells us to do something, right, we have an imperative, we have a command to do that. Of course, we can choose against that by following our inclination. But the moral law gives us, right, our duty of what we need to do. So moral worth is not found in the purpose, but in the maxim. So to give an example of what this is, maxim is a rule by which one acts. So for an example, if I decide to tell the truth in a given situation, the maxim is to be honest or to tell the truth. So again, we're looking for the decision of whether or not to tell the truth, not the result of that decision. Hopefully you're thinking about situations where this may be problematic. So that's it for part one. So the next time we'll look at part two and continue on our discussion of Kant.